We can do this figuratively, but you open a barbecue place tomorrow. What's the name of the barbecue place?
Bob's Big Boy is taken, right?
We have to ask ChatGPT, but...
I think it is.
Okay.
I think it would be copyright infringement of something of sorts. I don't know. Alan, that's a tough one. How about just Bob's?
Okay, Bob's. I'll go to that.
Don't kiss and don't tell.
Barbecue and big ideas.
You wanna get yourself in trouble. Your true love will leave you.
Let's talk about the past and the future. So Disney, incredible founder culture, Walt Disney, you've talked about it a lot. And just for the audience, like, describe the founder culture that existed at Disney. Just what it meant to you.
Well, Walt founded the company in 1923, so the company's over 100 years old. He died in 1966. That was after Disneyland had opened and before Disney World had opened. And it was a relatively small company. He was a true force within the walls of Disney and actually in the end in the world. As an aside, some years back I discovered that all the contents of his office had been kept in a vault somewhere on the Disney property, and all over the world there was reporting on Walt Disney dying. And in 1966, maybe next to, at the time, Muhammad Ali, and I don't know, maybe the Pope at that time, he was one of the most well-known, if not the most well-known person in the world. Elvis Presley might have been up there at the time too. So you can imagine if the person who's running your company is one of the most well-known people in the world, their personality, their vision, their ethics, their everything is just imbued and it exists in every corner of the company that he founded, which is quite interesting, really, because sometimes you could argue that almost creates a cult-like culture, and I think actually to some extent that was the case with him. Now, he was very talented, he was very energetic, he was clearly very communicative, and so he had his hand in everything. Yep. And that probably almost strengthened the cult in a way. And nothing happened at the company without Walt approving it. And when he died, they say, it took 10 years for the company to get over his death. That for 10 years, they spent asking what would Walt do, which is ridiculous because one of the things that, if you've studied Walt, you'll quickly discover is that he was an innovator and a futurist and someone that was never wedded to the past except understanding what the past contained or had in terms of values. That was important to bring forward. But he knew the world was always changing, and he was the ultimate innovator.
Talk about how do you honor the culture but still be innovative.
So it's interesting. So 2005, I become CEO of the company. Walt is dead for 40 years, really. And actually, while people aren't going around asking what he would have done, there's still an adherence to the past that I actually thought was unhealthy. And in effect, they were letting the past get in the way of innovation. So I tried to articulate both a respect for the past, but a desire to move the company forward. And what I ultimately concluded was that the past is something that should be respected, but not revered. And there's a big difference. If you revere something, you might as well just put it in a glass case and not make sure that it never changes. You might put it in a museum if you'd like. And so I talked about, let's respect the values that got us where we are. What is the essence of Disney? Who are we? And let's make sure that we're not only bringing them forward, but they're core to everything we do. But let's not revere them to the point where we're not capable of doing different things. And that actually resonated. And there was this belief that everything we did that was different than had been done years past, the empire was going to crumble.
I mean the sweetest little songbird.
So at 6th Street, 2 years ago at our offsite, we talked about this concept of self-improvement at scale, which is a Japanese philosophy that I've always lived by called Kaizen, which is basically continuous self-improvement. You have also your own form of a Japanese philosophy that you followed called, you might pronounce this wrong, Shokunin. Talk about what that is and what it means to you. And
that's basically the relentless pursuit of perfection.
Yeah.
And the inspiration to me in terms of that term and that belief came actually not that long ago from a documentary that was done about a sushi chef in Tokyo named Jiro. Jiro dreamed of sushi.
Great documentary.
And here was a guy at the time, he's now in his 90s, who at 88 years old, having earned 3 Michelin stars, was still trying to improve. And that just really resonated with me. I actually took a clip of the documentary and showed it at a Disney offsite to about 350 executives. And that constant desire to learn more, to do more, to get better is something I think is incredibly powerful as a mechanism for propelling someone forward. And it's also, I think, critical for a company. And I tried to teach that at Disney. If you have time and you got resources, then don't accept something that's only good, work to make it great, for instance. Never accept mediocrity. And basically never stop trying to improve something. And then I was lucky because when we bought Pixar in 2005, Steve Jobs became our largest shareholder. I had known Steve a bit, but we were not friends. And I did not expect that we would become friends, but he became a really dear friend to me. And in learning the way I did about Steve, I discovered that's exactly who he was. Now, he was a relentless perfectionist, and he could drive people crazy at times because he demanded such perfection from everybody else. But that quality of expecting perfection and demanding that people really work hard to make something better than it potentially was or than it could be is very powerful. And that was Jiro for me and Steve Jobs.
So don't kiss and don't tell.
You took a fractured relationship and built a special relationship with Steve Jobs. Talk about that.
So much to unpack here. By the time I had become COO and president, and close to when I became CEO, the relationship between Disney and Pixar, and it fractured. And then in I come as CEO. And I realized that for a few reasons, having the relationship with Steve and having the relationship with Pixar was essential to Disney. One, if you look at the history of Disney, as animation goes, so goes the company. The company is really big these days. It's not dependent on any one animated film, but it's incredible how the perception of those films rubs off on the perception of the company. So I needed to fix Disney animation. I also was a big believer in using, in fact, it was one of my strategic pillars, in using technology for 3 things: to make our product better, to reach consumers more ubiquitously, effectively, to make the company more efficient. And I thought that Pixar was a great example of using technology to make product better, and I wanted to send that signal to Disney overall. And I also thought that if I could figure out how to do business with Steve, I would learn a thing or two from him. So it was somewhat selfish in nature. The idea that I had was, why not take every episode of every TV show ever made and create an iTunes-like platform for that and let people access those episodes through, then it would have been a website, or mobile devices that could do it. So I decided to call Steve.
Is this the first call?
I called him the day before it was announced that I was becoming CEO, because I just wanted to say I'd like the opportunity to come in and see whether we can fix this relationship. Then I called him and I said this, I had this idea. He said, it's not that crazy an idea. I'd like to come down and talk to you. He comes down, he takes a new iPod out of his pocket. He shows me it's got a screen on it that can project video. He said, if Apple brings this product out, would you license your content to it? I said, absolutely. We did a deal in 5 days to put Disney shows and movies onto that platform. That spoke volumes to him in that I was, one, interested in Apple, interested in technology, and open-minded about taking the company forward, because that was a huge move in terms of disrupting traditional distribution platforms, television networks, movie theaters, et cetera. And I didn't realize it at the time, but how much that it impressed him, but it did enough to earn me major points and credibility. So 6 months passes. I now am CEO of the company. The second day I was CEO, maybe the first day I have a Disney board meeting, and I say to them, my number one, they want to know my priorities. My number one priority is to fix Disney animation, and I lay out 3 ways to do that, and one of them is to buy Pixar. Silence in the room. And I realized that they never thought that could ever happen. I did say to the board it could be expensive. They said, how much? I said, I don't know, $6-7 billion. And they thought it was such a crazy idea that they never said no, because they didn't think it would ever happen. I took that to mean I could explore it. And the next day I called Steve and said, I got another crazy idea. And next thing I know, I'm up at Apple, and we're in front of a whiteboard writing down he was doing all the writing, the pros and cons of the deal. And I don't know how much longer after that, but we did a deal to buy Pixar for $7.3 billion. You have to communicate and maybe even over-communicate with your people. It's something I learned actually when I became CEO. I thought initially I was saying things too often, and I was getting tired of my own words. And I got some advice from a really good communications executive who said, "Do you still believe in those words?" I said, "Yes." "Are they still relevant?" "Yes." "Then don't stop saying them," she said. Keep repeating them. You may be tired of them, but they're important. So I think the first thing is you have to communicate, over-communicate. You have to have real clarity of voice and purpose, and what you're communicating needs to be digestible. You obviously have to walk the talk. You have to set an example as well while you're communicating. You have to do what you say you want other people to do. Not just showing up, but showing up, in the best possible way, in all directions. You have to make sure that you have a core group of people that you trust implicitly, that really hears you the most and understands what's driving you and what you want to drive them, and you have to demand of them that they communicate, and so on and so on. I think also a leader has to set an example as well and make sure that people see that. So it's not just communicating and showing up, it's just making sure that what you say is who you are, what you say is what you do, and everybody understands that, and you have to essentially be demanding.
When you're evaluating leaders, obviously communication is key. What are some of the things when you're deciding 350 executives, who's going to be the next 100? Like, what are you looking at? What's your process for doing that?
It's interesting because Disney just went through a succession process and chose a successor to me, Josh D'Amaro. And so we talked a lot about, as a board, about what we want in the next leader of Disney. And clearly there are attributes that are needed for that job. It relates to, respecting and in some form or another appreciating creators and the creative process. But I think there's a commonality that you look for in all leaders. One, I think you want someone to be really authentic. You want someone to be really curious. You've found over time that that's one of the most powerful traits a person can have. You don't innovate, you don't try new things. You don't really survive in a disrupted world without being curious, in my opinion. I think you have to be accessible to people. You can't cocoon yourself. You can't hide behind in a corner office, for instance. You have to have tremendous energy. You have to have not just the ability to manage today, but you have to look around corners and prepare to manage for tomorrow. Very, very important to balance that, meaning really high standards in terms of not only what you expect of people, but what you expect of the product. Significant integrity is important. I could probably go on and on. I happen to believe you need to be optimistic, too.
That's important. We talk about here about energy signature. Energy signature being the energy that someone brings into a meeting. First of all, as a leader, was that something you were born with?
I wrote about this. My father, who died over a decade ago, had some significant issues, meaning he was probably bipolar. He fought depression a good part of his life, and he had trouble holding a job because of that. But he turned out to be a very decent man and a great father. But he had a terrible temper that I witnessed a lot. I was never a victim of it per se, but I witnessed it as a child. And I'm pretty certain from my memory that I committed to myself to not being that, to maintaining some control over my own temper. And I don't know whether that's contributed to a calmness. I'm not sure. I've also worked for people that have had a tendency to overreact to things, to be histrionic, to fly off the handle, and I just don't think that that's all that productive, and nor do I think it's very attractive in a leader. I think I've probably worked over the years to, aside from my upbringing, to instill a sense of calmness in me, and to, obviously appropriately deal with crises, which is critical. There are times when you have to actually almost use tension to deal with a crisis, but I don't think that it's a particularly effective way to behave.
Yep, I agree.
Or to lead.
Agreed. What is what no one's talking about? that you think will actually be more impacted by AI than maybe people understand?
Well, on the positive side, I think what will survive in terms of media will be great distribution, obviously, I'll call it quality content and brands. They're sort of tied together, high quality brands. And the third category is called connection to audience, knowing who the audience is, enabling the distributor to get closer to the audience and enabling the audience to essentially get closer to the distributor. I think AI is going to be very, very powerful right there. It will enable people to bring people in, and it'll enable you to reach people much more effectively, aside from obviously algorithms and tailoring products very specifically to people's interests. I think that so far is being somewhat underestimated as a value. Everybody's focused now on the disruptive side, and the disruptive side is, I think, mostly aimed at creativity. And there it's, will the machine ultimately replace the human being and the human creative mind? I tend to be a little bit more conservative about this. I don't believe that an AI program is going to be able to replicate the creativity of the human mind in its highest form.
Yep.
I could be proven wrong over time, but I just don't believe that's the case. And having sat in on pitches by creators of original ideas, I'll give you, for instance, you go to Pixar, meet with directors, and the directors pitch their ideas to you. It's a director-driven business there, and it's the directors that come with the ideas for the movies that they ultimately direct. And you're sitting in a room, and a director pitches an idea about the emotions inside the brain of an 11-year-old girl. And he talks to you about his daughter, who's 11, and, well, what's going on in her mind. And you say, tell me more. What emotions are you talking about? Happiness and joy and anger, and it goes on and on. And then you start asking questions about, what are they going to look like? Where do they live in the brain? Will you go into her brain? Do you go out of her brain? That's an unbelievably original idea. Now, maybe every human being's idea is derivative of all their experience in life, and so therefore nothing is really original, but that's, I guess, not a very, good way to view creativity. I happen to believe that, yes, we are the product of our experiences, and everything that goes in, ultimately, everything that comes out is the result of everything that has gone in. So an original idea is original, and it's an amalgamation of all these things that go into the brain of a person. But I just don't see an AI program actually coming up with that. I tend to be optimistic about the ability of the human creator to continue to create things for mankind or humankind in the highest form.
I hope that's right.
But going back to the question, I do think we're all going to get smarter. I think it's going to be powerful. AI will be a powerful tool for collaboration. It's going to speed things up, clearly, make us more efficient as well. I think those are all positives.